So I'm back with Lee from the Metal Prognosis, and this is the second video we're doing on these mixes we're doing comparing sort of out-of-the-box mixing versus more digital in-the-box mixing. And today we are doing the digital ones. We both came up with a mix, and we're going to talk about the gear we used and how it differed from doing a more out-of-the-box analog approach. So if you want to give us any background on some of the recording methods you used in this version for capturing the drums, for example, and all the DIs and whatnot.
We approached this during just before our city went into lockdown. So we were just a two-piece band at the time because we lost a drummer. So we borrowed a drummer from another band, Elusive. They're a great band and good friends. And we had the drummer come around and do everything on the digital drum, on the electric drum kit. So he actually physically played along, and that's how we captured that performance that he did. Bass was just straight DI and all post-processing. The guitars, I decided to do it again through the 11 rack, but instead I did it directly and then mucked around with it eternally afterwards, instead of just previously miking and then having what I had, which is my original approach when we first recorded it analog. So yeah, we did a little bit differently, but that's how we originally captured it.
So I did think it was an electric kit performance from the just the quality of the MIDI was good. So I predicted that much. Now the DIs, those were different performances than the old studio session?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, that's interesting. They're very similar. I wouldn't have guessed that. I assume you recorded DI in the studio as well and had those on hand. So this is an entirely sort of new takes on everything. What about the vocals? Those were the same in both projects, right?
They were both the same because the original version, I actually sung a different melody.
Okay.
So I thought for this project, I'll keep them the same because I had the dry vocals anyway. Without sounding too harsh on Parsley, they're a little bit crap. And I've evolved a lot more in how I write my melodies and how I combine my backing vocals and arrangements. So the previous version was a lot more blander and just not fun. Really, just not fun.
Fair enough. I know the feeling, and especially for vocals. I can look past old guitar tracks and sometimes I hate them, but old vocal tracks I'm more likely to hate them than anything. So
yeah, because I think there was about 9 or 10 years difference between them. So
okay,
a lot of growing up has happened since then.
Oh yeah, definitely. So well, that's very cool. We're going to roll these mixes and the breakdowns following those of what we each did in our mixes, and then we're going to come back on the other side and have a little chat about what we think about the mixes and what we each did. So see you then.
One more hit, one more drag, while the soul wins.
Alright, let's have a quick look under the hood and have a look at my very first attempt at doing a full digital mix. So first thing I'll do is show you here, there's very little going on. I actually try to keep things as simplistic as possible and let the instruments kind of breathe naturally. So with the guitars here, I was inspired to go with the Neural DSP's Fortin, because I had a funny feeling Nick was going to go for the Audio Assault, and I was keen to do that too. But in saying that, as we see in the cabs here, I've got the Randall Kirk Hammett cabs, which is an Audio Assault IR signature pack they brought out. So I couldn't escape it fully. So let's quickly show you without going too much into it. Put the bus on there. This is what the guitars sound like do near the end by themselves. So they're standing nice and full, nice and thick. It's got a bit of that mid scoop, which I was kind of going for. Only other thing I did with the guitars is for the lead patch, I got a bit of delay and a bit of a flange, get a little bit of flavour, a little bit of a touch, help it blend in a little bit more. With the way the stomp box here, that is all I really did with the guitars. And some basic EQ in the bass, even simpler. Dry bass running through here, through the bus, and through the bus, I've got, when it loads up, the Neural DSP's Dark Class. I've got the vintage pedal set up here compared to their other one, their micro something. And with the cab here, pure default settings. I didn't touch any of this because it sounded brutal and really cut through just as it is. So let's have a quick listen to the bass by itself. So I've got a lot of subs running through there. Actually, I've got a lot of subs because if I bring up the EQ quickly, no, that's run the guitars, run the bass. Come on, bass. There we go. Actually, I had to take a little bit of the subs out because that was just rocking my sub, just my subwoofer here, just a little bit too much. So there's the bass, and let's quickly push on to the vocals. The vocals, I've got a fair few things happening here, and I laid them in what I feel to be a very creative way. But in regards to mixing, I used the Chris Lord vocal plugin, which is really cool. So this is where I get my compression, basic EQing, not too much. And this is where I get my reverb to kind of blend it in, but as best as what I could. So let's quickly just listen to some of the vocals. And I EQ'd them all slightly, just a little bit different to layer them and give it that kind of effect. Oh, there you go. As you can see, no post EQing on the vocals there. And this is what we had.
While you're so in demand, like a cancer that won't stop growing, as you try to break what's already broken.
So yeah, once again, try to keep it pretty straightforward and simple. And each one of them has a different Chris Lord plugin in it, just because I approached it a little bit different and did little things here and there to it, just to find it in their place. Because I don't know if you can see, probably, I'm not sure if you can, but all the different levels I've got with the vocals. So the secondary vocals are, which is a mimic take to help thicken it, is a lot lower compared to the others. And the drums, to quickly go through that, I use the Steve Slate drums. Very straightforward, very simple. I added an extra kick and snare to it, and this is probably my most not really challenging. I spent the most time in trying to figure out the best way and how to balance this fully, because mixing it purely in here, I've never done before. I've normally extracted all the waves and mixed it like an analog mix. But yeah, these are so clean and so well captured that the drums sound really good just by themselves. So those little dribbles and the snares and all that came through really cleanly and nicely. Yeah, and I was really happy with that. And and let me bring up the EQ for the drums here. I just took a little bit off the bass because once again, I thought it was a little bit too boomy. I got a stereo enhancer here just to help widen it and give a little bit more color. But as you can see, there's no other plugins in that happening. So I didn't use any fancy reverbs or, I say fancy reverb, any reverb, or anything else to make the sound big. What I did instead to help get that more livelier, bigger sound is I just pushed the room mics. Not that room mic there, this room mic here mainly. So these two room mics here, and balance the overhead a bit to try to give it that largeness and richness of emulating an acoustic drum kit. And the last thing that I'll say, which I do in all my mixes, is my limiter. I always put a brick limiter on there. So if you get those one or two little peaks that come through, it's going to stop them, which is nice. But also, while I'm actually mixing, I like to have it on, because as I'm adding plugins here and there and something explodes, it's not going to blow my speakers or my ears. So it's nice to have it. And once the mix is complete, I can listen to it and see exactly how much leeway and headroom I've got to go with it too. So there is a super quick rundown tour of my first attempt at doing this digital mixdown. So yeah, keen to see now what Nick has done.
So
break this down, shall we? So the first thing I did with this, and I did the digital version before the acoustic version, I figured it would be easier, and it was. It's a slightly different process, but I think ultimately it's a little easier. The drums are sort of the hard part, and the working with samples is pretty easy. First of all, with any mix, especially if I'm getting files from a client or a friend like this, I just like to organize and color them, and that takes a few minutes, but really saves you a lot of headaches later. I also routed all my drums out. I split them out into all these channels, and if we look at the mixer here, it's basically set up like if I was doing it with acoustic drums, except there's samples going in. And for the samples, I am using just the free SSD5 stock kit, pretty much doing all the mixing myself. With the drums, the first step for me is always to inspect the MIDI and listen through just the soloed drums and make sure all the parts sound realistic and the fills aren't too silly and the velocities make sense. So these were done quite well overall, and they were 90% of the way there. I just went through, I sort of pulled down the velocity on some of the fills where I thought the toms were just like little machine gunny, and changed the cymbal arrangements here and there a touch, changed the tom fills a little bit here and there, mostly just working with the velocity. I left everything where it was if I didn't have a problem with it. I didn't try to go in and change stuff a whole lot. Also, some of these cymbals where it's just riding on the hi-hat or the ride, and just pulling down every other hit is a nice, just sort of gives it a little more groove, makes it sound a little more human. I don't know if these were done on an E-kit. They sound kind of like they were. If not, either way, good job programming. But I think they might have been done on an electronic kit, which gives them a little extra realism already. Adjusting the fills was the main thing. I added in a few snare and kick parts where I thought they needed them to help give the song more energy. That took an hour or two to just sort of nitpick the drum tracks for a while, but then that's done. And I always recommend going through that and being careful with velocities, and don't want it to be a giveaway that I'm using samples. I actually don't have that many plugins on anything. I'm mostly just using the SSL channel strip on everything. The kick, there is a little extra reverb on the snare. Basically, all of these individual tracks have a copy of the SSL channel strip with different settings, but that's got a gate, compressor, and EQ. For the guitars, Lee, you are right. I'm using Audio Assault plugins. Yes, I'm using the new Bulldog, and it was released not that long ago, so I wanted to use it. I'm using that for all the main rhythm tracks. The only exception to that here is this lead part, where you've got this single note lead with multiple harmonies. I decided to go in a completely different direction with that, as you heard, completely wet, and sort of go for this cool string pad almost sound. I really like how that came out, and we can take a listen to it right here. That's two of the guitars, and then there's one left in that's more of a normal lead. I have the big goat on that to give it some extra fuzz and a little lower gain on the amp, and then I'm also running that with delay and reverb on that channel, and so altogether that sounds like this. So that was a fun little thing, and I like how that came out. This whole arrangement is a little bit different from what I would do with centered guitars and these multiple leads, but the one odd thing is that there's the centered guitar playing chugs, just doing a little rhythm thing in the background, but that's not doubled. So I would have preferred to double it, but again, I'm leaving the arrangements pretty much as I got them. That's the guitars. Nothing really crazy going on there. For the bass, it was split up into two tracks, so I did two different sounds for it. Lee was not doing that, so on my other mix, I bussed them together. For this, I thought, I've got them on two tracks already. Why not use two different bass amps? So I am using more Audio Assault, using the Duality Bass Studio here, and that's got some drive on it. This is sort of a parallel drive thing. I really like this amp in general. And that's sound number 1. And it's got some grit to it, but it's, you know, the milder of the two. And then for the second bass channel, I'm going through the blue face here. These are off normally. Well, there's a little bit in there. My mix knob here is at about 10%. This distortion is completely off for most of the song. And the drive is off. So I'm getting a little bit, this is actually in a way more clean, but it does have some fuzz on it, so. It's not really more clean. I don't know why I said that. But it's got some light fuzz on it, just a different character from the other one. And then for the bass breakdown section, I max out the fuzz. Well, it's not quite max, 50%. And then the distortion, the DS1. So for the tom part, it's really more gnarlier. And I like how that sounds. That part, there's no guitars, so I just need to make the bass a little more bigger and interesting. Then for the vocals, these I did pretty much identically in both versions of this mix. Got the channel strip first, some, you know, basic touch-ups, and then I'm running that into the BOD SansAmp pedal here for drive. And it's got parallel drive, and that's giving me some distortion. Then I'm hitting that with more compression, and then the free vocal doubler, which is giving it more flavor and width, kind of chorus thing. And then that's going into a limiter, and then the delay, and let's just play a little bit of the lead vocals here.
The beginning of the end, try to see where everyone's wrong.
So I think the distortion came out really cool on this, and then we've got harmony tracks and such that are all pretty much running through a very similar chain. There's a little bit less drive on these. They're just sort of a little milder and maybe more delay on them. So that's pretty much all the vocals, and that is pretty much everything. I've also got a little bit of EQ on the vocal bus and this fresh air being a little top end sparkle, but it's pretty subtle stuff. And then the master is what I usually do these days for mastering is very simple. I run it through a bus compressor and I hit it with a limiter and I'm done. And I'm not trying to squash the crap out of it. Usually most of my mixes sit around minus 12 dB LUFS, which I feel like is a good sweet spot. It's like minus 14 is kind of the most dynamic that most platforms are going for. And so I crunch it a little bit, but just a touch. I don't like overly compressed masters, but I think a little bit of extra crunch kind of thickens it up a little bit, and we can get away with that. But, you know, we're talking 2 dB or so. The loudest I ever go is maybe minus 9 or minus 10. And then there's this little drum automation here, this EQ automation, which is automating a filter opening up, an EQ opening up. And that gives a little movement to this drum part here. I've also got another filter on the master. And that's, again, it's just an EQ. I'm automating the a low shelf, a high pass, basically, on EQ. And I do that on the master track, and I do that on a lot of tracks. But I like how it sounds. So that's the mix, and back to you, Future, Lee, and Nick.
All right, so now we're here to talk about the digital mix that we put together and did. So I've done the analog one, went through all that. Had a lot of interesting highlight moments from both parties, which is really interesting and fun, and a great conversation. But now it's time to continue on that conversation with the digital stuff. So, yeah, Mr. Nick, how did you feel about working with the digital raw tracks and mixing it either isolated and compared to the analog ones that we did?
Well, there was some similarities between them, but I did them in different project files and didn't copy much over except for the vocal processing, which I did tweak a little bit between each one. But other than that, I approached the digital first, and it was definitely the easier of the two mixes to do. The drums were overall very good, and you mentioned that they were played on an electronic kit, which I predicted, and glad I was correct on. So the performance there was really good, and it's easy enough to tell because it sounds like a real drummer playing, and it has the nuances of a real drummer. Where I don't know how much you play the drums yourself, but you have a kit there, so you probably know pretty well how to program drums like a drummer would, but not everyone does, especially guitarists. I mean, I hear a lot of amateur projects where, people have just kind of all over the place drum programming that's completely unrealistic, and it just immediately says like, okay, it's programmed, and that's fine. Though I'm particular in that I don't like to know that it's triggered or programmed right away. If I hear
I love
stuff,
those moments where you get the file and you see the drummer's got 4 hands here. How is that possible?
Yeah, exactly.
And moments like that.
Yeah, just like too many hits all over the place, or everything is clearly gridded. And that's another thing with these. Like they weren't to the grid, but they also didn't look like just like random humanization. It was obvious that it was played. And I don't know if you did any further like quantizing or editing of the drums after the recording. Was it straight from the drummer, or?
We did a little bit of altering here and there, mainly if they were like trigger lags. Because I think during one of the pads we had to change because it was shooting off completely different all the other ones, so we had to replace that. The little tweaks like that, but we did try to keep as much of it natural as possible because when we got the drummer in, because we had a temporary drummer, we had a friend drummer come in and play, I wanted to catch his energy and catch his performance. I didn't want him just to robotically play or do that because I could have just sent him the files and he could have just done it on a mouse. I wanted him to actually play it and really give us that energy and that intensity, which I feel like we definitely achieved. I feel anyway, but I'm looking at it from bias goggles here because I recorded it and that's what I was aiming for.
Yeah, the drums are really good, and there was a few different things. Now that I know that it was actually 2 different drummers, it makes sense because there was parts that were played differently, and I wasn't really sure when you sent the files if it was the same drummer, if he if you had sort of carefully note for note analyzed the track and tried to recreate it, or how exactly you got a MIDI file and an acoustic performance. But there is some differences, like the cymbals are a little bit different. There's a cool thing he does with the hats, sort of a little hat fill that is in this digital version and not on the acoustic one. So there is some different performances.
The intro is different too.
It is, yeah. The intro, I don't think the other one has the little drum fill intro. So yeah, there's definitely a number of differences in the drums. But yeah, I wasn't sure how you got to those. So yeah, it makes sense that it's a different drummer because there's a little different approach to it. But it's overall pretty much it's the same song, but a different approach by a different drummer, and that's always cool to hear. And this one, I think we both sort of did this a little different approach when it came to the drums. I went with a more, which I like to do in general with samples and acoustic drums, is just sort of process it the same way, which I did in this. I started both from scratch, but I used basically the same plugins. I used the same methods. With the samples, I just don't have to worry about gates. I don't have to worry about bleed and weird stuff that way, which saves a lot of time. But otherwise, I basically split out the drum tracks and processed them with the same SSL channel strip that I did with the acoustic drums. And of course the EQ settings are different because the sounds are different, and this one I had the freedom to choose any kit too, and we both ended up with a pretty similar both using the Steven Slate drums. I don't actually have the paid version of it, so I was just using the free kit, and I was happy with how it came out. It's a really good, as far as a free drum plugin, you can't beat it. And I've been a big fan of the GGD One Kit Wonder series, and so I own some of those and use them a lot. But with this one, I figured I wanted to. Those are sort of like pre-mixed, and the idea is that you don't have to do anything, which is great if you're doing like a YouTube demo and you want to lay down some drums and you don't want to spend 4 hours mixing it. And it's just like, it's good out of the box. I can slap on my own little custom preset and go to town. But for this, for a mix video, it's more interesting to do it sort of myself. So it came out good, I thought. And it was pretty much the same sort of acoustic approach. And I saw you did all yours within the plugin, which I honestly haven't even looked at with the Steven Slate drums. I have not tried any of their built-in plugins or mixing, or I just split the tracks out.
Which is really interesting because that's what I normally do. And when I recorded it for the album, that's exactly what I did. I bounced them out to individual tracks and treated it like an acoustic drum kit. But I got told by a few engineer friends that are kind of having a go at me, teasing me in a fun, friendly way, going, you can do it all just in the program. You don't need to do this extra work. So I thought for this one, just as a kind of a experiment and an opportunity to explore, I was like, yeah, I'm going to try to do it all there and see if I can get it sounding decent with it. And it wasn't actually that hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't mind how they turned it out. But as you said, they're already pre-mixed and captured really well anyway. So
yeah,
in theory, I didn't need to do much.
No, and that is the nice thing with good samples is like there's now they're not like pre-mixed too much, which is nice. So you can sort of dial in your own level of compression and stuff, but you don't need to do a whole lot of corrective EQ. I'd say all the EQ was sort of additive, just, if I want a little more punch out of the snare in a certain region or something, rather than going in and trying to like, okay, there's an annoying ringing overtone here, or there's, this mic placement was bad and I have to try to compensate for volume or something. So none of that, which definitely the digital mix was easier. And, I did it first and basically, spent a couple hours on it, got the files done and, played it in my car, and I was happy with it. And I figured at that point, if I'm happy with it, especially in my car, it's like I could go back to it and I could try to add more and tweak more. And there's, I'm sure there's like a little bit of improvement, but I'd say if I'm happy with it in the car, it's 90% there. And it's possible that I could go back to it and make it worse at that point. You might be able to get that extra 10%, but I've definitely done the opposite many times. And I thought, okay, I want a little more of this or that. And then I ended up tweaking half the plugins I'm using, and I go back to it and I'm like, oh, it doesn't translate anymore. There's some sort of weird balance issue. And so I try to avoid that because I don't like being stuck in this sort of mixing hell where I'm like going back and forth, and I just, there's translation problems. So this one, it came out pretty easy on the first go, which is rare, but good. More and more, like I've gotten to a point where nowadays I can usually get something and know that it sounds good on my monitors, it sounds good on my headphones, take it to the car, it sounds good, and that's like, okay, I figure it's gonna translate. And that's taken almost 10 years of mixing, I think, to get comfortable with that. But yeah, so this mix was overall easy. I liked the drums a lot. I did mention like I did tweak the drums a little bit, but I didn't really have to do very much. And, normally if someone was to send me drums they'd programmed, I'd probably do a lot more, and I'd probably change a whole bunch of things and find a lot of, things depending on how good they are at programming drums. I've been doing it a long time, and so I have a lot to like be picky about. So yeah, happily there was not much. I thought there was a few tom fills and stuff where they were just kind of a little machine gunny, a little too much of too high velocity all at the same time, which a lot of that can have to do with the trigger sensitivity on an electronic kit too. But Yeah. It's inspired me, our last conversation, and working with these files too. I might go pick up an electronic kit tomorrow. I've never really owned one. I mean, my first drum kit, if you can call
They're
it, was a
fun.
little Yamaha multi-pad, which, you know, me and my drummer, like, we played the hell out of that thing until it basically broke. And well, it did break. It kept shutting down. It probably was a bad solder joint on the power thing, and if I hadn't thrown it out years ago, I could fix it now. It wasn't a great unit anyways. It was an old little rubber pad thingy, but yeah. But I haven't had a proper one, and so I might get one for the studio, because I do a lot of programming, and it would just be more fun. I use the keyboard now, which does make it a little more engaging, and so but having a proper kit, definitely.
Yeah, it definitely makes a difference, especially when I'm composing drums, because I'm not the world's best drummer.
I remember the last song I
quantize.
composed on drums.
Not just quantized, but what I did was I did the hands first because I couldn't sync my feet with my hands because I'm not the world's greatest drummer compared to what I was doing.
Mhm.
So I just did 2 takes. One with my hands, the second take with my feet.
Yep. Well, that's what
And
I
on
do
the
on
same MIDI
the
track. I was
keyboard
like, that's
too.
brilliant.
Yeah, no, that's how I would recommend. I mean, that's how I always do it. If I'm just playing with the keyboard, I actually built a custom kick tower the other day, which I will have a video coming out on, so that I could play kick drum and do the hands on the keyboard, which
That's
is
awesome.
which is a step up. Though it's a little funny too, because it's like I've got a real feeling kick drum, and then I'm playing the keys over here. But at least I can do all 4 parts at once, and because I'm not good enough at keyboard drums to get cool sounding, to, you know, double kicks and snare and all the cymbals. Like, you have to be a really amazing keyboard drummer, which is a particular set of skills that you don't need really to master for anything. But, you know, it's a cool party trick, I guess.
But going back to what you were saying before on how quicker it was doing the digital analog, my experience with it was pretty much the same as yours. Because I did the analog first, the analog took me roughly about, I reckon, 6 hours I sat down with it. Because the drums, I wasn't happy with the drums, so I just kept going back over and over and over it. And it took me about 4 mix downs with the analog before I was like, all right, time to let it go now and move on. It's at a point where it's not too bad, and I'm not like blown away by it, but I'm happy enough with it to go, yep, it works. The digital, it was, I think, an hour and a half I spent on the digital.
Yeah.
And I was like, done. And I was super surprised, but I also made sure I didn't get analysis paralysis with the guitars. I tried to pick a good distortion and cab straight off the bat, very firstly, as soon as I touched guitars, and didn't veer from it. Because there are so many different cabs options out there that could just take it anywhere. So I was like, don't fall down that rabbit hole.
Mhm.
Pick something, stick with it. And yeah, the mix took hardly any time or effort.
Either.
Yeah. It's interesting, even though we had pretty different approaches in our mixes, there's a similarity in that sort of mindset of just like, don't overanalyze stuff, and that's something I've been learning, especially like, well, and you know, both of us trying to post regularly on YouTube, and you know, we're doing new mixes like every week or multiple times a week. That's something I've definitely learned in the last year from via YouTube, is like, if you have one album that you're working on for a long time and that's like your only project for a year, it's like you have all the time in the world to try out every amp sim or every, you know, reamping stuff, different cabs, and, you know, adding different layers. But, you know, if you're trying to keep to like a regular schedule, either as a professional, you know, mix engineer, or doing something like YouTube, you know, you just can't, I can't sit there for like 2 hours trying out every different IR and see which one is the best. It's like, I'm going to go through a few, spend about 20 minutes on it. And, you know, and the more that I do that, I find that my mixes end up coming out way better than when I overanalyze it. So even though I may not be investing as much time into it, my ears have gotten, you know, better at picking out like, here's the winner. I hear it. I like it. I'm going with it. and you know, and being a bit, you know, kind of tough on yourself to just make a choice and make it work and build the rest of the mix around it, because you can have the best guitar tone in the world, but if you don't have drums to back it up, it doesn't matter. You know, no one's going to care. Yeah. And sadly, you know, I see even, you know, even some very talented people out there who are showing off, you know, plugins and stuff. And I think, you know, the guitar tone sounds great, but I'm not as big of a fan of the drums. So the overall production is like, if the drums and the bass were better, you'd make that amp sound that much better. Mixing is a difficult thing, but nonetheless, yeah, you don't want to be too short-sighted and just look at the guitar tone or just, you know, just the drums. And usually I find for everyone, for every mixer out there, drums are the hard part. And so like drums, that's where you can generally spot problems in a mix, is like how do the drums fit. And because even a really weird guitar tone, I feel like you can have a really crappy sounding guitar. If the drums sound awesome, you know, you can make that guitar fit with it and just like, you know, change the bass, change the drums. And guitarists like us like to spend a lot of time thinking about guitar tones, but there's a bigger world to think about. It was interesting. Your mix, I thought, well, on the digital side, I thought there was way too much bass, which is funny because I don't have a subwoofer here anymore. And seeing your breakdown, I think you have the same sub I used to have. It's that Rocket 10.
Yes,
Yep.
it is.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. I sold mine a couple months ago because it sat in storage for too long. And I bought it years ago, you know, thinking I needed to add a sub to my system. And I found that it made all my mixes too thin, because I would have this extra sub power there. And so I would tend to mix more sub. And my current monitors don't have the best like super low frequency, so I have to rely sometimes visually to like make sure that I have the right level of subs in my mix, because I can't always hear all of that. But I thought it was interesting that you have a sub there, and I thought I was hearing way too much low frequency from the bass, which is usually the opposite, you know. So it's just sort of a funny thing. But maybe on your system, you know, it works or something. Or maybe you're just used to a lot of, who knows?
Low end.
But yeah. I mean, you know, nothing wrong with that. But but I thought like on the analog mix, I thought your bass sat really well. And overall the mix like was more aggressive. And I thought on the digital side, that's the main thing. Like the first thing I would do is just like reduce the sub level, because I think that would clear up some of the guitars and the kick drum. The bass sounds good, you know, it's not like the bass sounds bad, it's just I thought there was too much of it, and I rarely say that but, you know, but sometimes.
That's definitely a good footnote. I like it.
Yeah, I also noticed I thought the China and the ride bell in the drums sounded good. I actually liked the level they were at. They maybe were a touch loud, but I thought they sounded good. I wish kind of all the cymbals were up to that level, because they sounded way louder. And I'm not sure, yeah, like why exactly. But I thought the crashes were kind of too quiet, and then the China and the ride bell were a little too loud. But all the cymbals could kind of come up to that level, you know, or a middle ground.
And that could be an oversight that I had trying out mixing purely in the box.
Yeah, for
rather
sure.
than bringing the file, creating the wave files and attacking in that way.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I mean, overall the drums sounded good. I thought they were maybe a bit quiet or distant sounding. You know, like they could be a little punchier, but you know, you're not really going to go too wrong with samples. And so it did sound good. I thought the digital mix was kind of overall, besides my complaint with the bass, you know, was very clean. And of all these 4 mixes we've done, I think that was the most sort of just clean and sort of straightforward. A little different when everything else was kind of more raw, more aggressive.
which kind of wasn't my intention, but I think because I did a minimalist, whatever the word is, approach, where I tried to not over-engineer it and go too crazy with it and just try to clean up little bits and shape it just a little bit. And because it was so clean to start with, the cleanness obviously is still shown through very strongly.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we talked about that in a couple weeks ago in our last conversation too. Since I started mixing to now using less plugins and trying to, be more efficient with my time and keep things simpler and, be really careful about making like really super wild EQ moves, unless I'm sure about them and I'm sure about the plugins I'm using. But I feel like in a sense I was more, because I didn't know better, I was willing to like throw everything at it and just go nuts with the EQ, and I'm more restrained, probably more heavy-handed with compression now, because I didn't really know what it was doing in the past always, and so I was like, I don't want to compress stuff too much, but now I feel like I'm more comfortable with it. But yeah, both of us are trying to keep it to a minimum plugins, not throwing on effects where they don't need to be, and we came out with very different results. But I feel like there is a similar, we've come to a similar mindset on that. And I do think that is the way to go. Not that adding effects is bad, knowing where they should go. And I try to use as little as I can. If the song needs something, do it. Absolutely. And use like cool and dramatic effects where you need to, but also not do stuff just because you have a new plugin that you want to use. Though I do that too. We all do, but with restraint, of course. Yeah. So.
Yeah, but that's the kind of the philosophy I definitely try to approach, where you give what the song needs, not what you want. Mm-hmm. Like you've got to have that priority in place when you're approaching it.
If you're working on a lot of projects, I know that I'm going to have a chance every week or, multiple times a week to try out a new plugin, to, try a different effect, to try a whole different production style. There's no pressure for me personally anymore to like, oh, I want this one project to have everything crammed into it, which is, where I used to be. And now it's like, okay, I'm going to write a different song. I'll produce something differently, and so I can use different plugins. I can try out new stuff all the time, and I can let it shine in a mix that isn't overwhelmed by 100 different cool plugins that might all be great on their own, but together, too many ingredients in the stew. It's like it can end up going from exciting to bland in a different way. Too much and still boring. I did have fun with this digital mix with throwing your harmonized leads into that super wet zone with the reverb and the delay, and I thought that sounded really cool. I haven't done something exactly like that. I think just because since you had 3 tracks with 3 different lead melodies, and one of them was kind of a more standard lead tone that already has reverb and delay, but then the others, I played around with sort of busting them all together into one more typical lead sound, but I just thought it was like kind of too much for the section because you also have vocals there, and so I thought, it ended up being fun to do it with that weird ambient sound. But it changes the character of the song in a way.
I definitely did.
Yeah. That part is kind of almost like much more mellower, but it's also the first verse, so I like what it did to the song.
Yeah, because the second verse takes a bit of a step up and it's got a little bit more of a push, so it definitely helped create that journey be clearer by doing stuff like that.
Your way of tracking guitars is different, the way everything was split up. And I guess, well, that's another question I have. When you were mixing these, did you just bust all those tracks into?
Yeah.
Yep.
I just bust them. So I had probably about 6, I'd say, all up. different guitar buses
Yeah.
that lasted the whole album, because the album was done in one session.
Mm-hmm.
So I had my rhythm guitars running all there, running all into the rhythm bus. So when it came to mixing and editing, because the file's already clean, I just had to worry about the buses 99% of the time and not the individual tracks.
Yeah, I sort of split out the two main sections. Like there's a main rhythm tone, and then I had more of a lead tone for the upper register stuff, the melodic leads and all. So at least on this digital one, I think I had those two extra harmony guitars on one bus, as well as a third one for the lead. But then also the rhythm guitars were going to a different bus. So I ended up having, 3 or 4 different guitar sounds throughout it, which to me, it seemed like the way the tracks were broken up, that was your intention, to have like all these different tones. And it may have just been a difference in how you edit things and how you, how you record it. So
it's interesting because, as I said, like in our last one we spoke about, where I never intended these files to get out.
Yeah.
So I didn't lay them out for any other eyes to be able to look at them and interpret them in a universal type of way.
Mm-hmm.
So since I left them as they were, just for me to be able to interpret on how I do them, it's fascinating on how you interpret it and how your train of thought went.
And now on the other one, because we talked in the interim, and I knew that you were busing the 2 bass channels together. I did that for the other mix, but for this one, I had 2 different bass tones, which I don't think was really what you were thinking at all. But
No.
but I thought it worked for the song, and like the parts were broken up to to the different parts of the song, the verse and the chorus and stuff. So it's like there's no reason that you shouldn't have a different tone between the verse and the chorus. Sometimes these things end up working out in a good way too. It gives you something new to think about and a different approach, and you can always comp and edit stuff together. And I could have done that, but I figured since you laid it out that way that there was some intention behind it for that. So
Nope.
but there's nothing wrong with it. However, it's like something to consider. And yeah, this wasn't something that you were planning to necessarily send off to a whole bunch of people, but being able to communicate your intention through how you track stuff, which is always difficult. I mean, I'm not.
Definitely.
I produce all my own stuff too, so I'm not working. If I'm working with another engineer, it's like I want specific instructions. How exactly do you want me to edit this to the finest detail possible so that you can get it and do your thing? And that's it. I have my own way of doing things. It works for me, and that's all. That's all I know.
Yeah.
And I think also it is something that I didn't used to worry that much about, and now just because I'm working on so many projects at the same time, like having a workflow that is consistent is a huge help.
Definitely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And like everyone develops their own kind of unique workflow. If you were going to run them through the same amp, is there any advantage to splitting them into separate parts? Like, does it help you to visualize the parts of the song better?
It's purely visualization. When you got them colored and grouped like that, I can just see exactly where the song's laid out and where it's going.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. I mean, like that's a good way to do things. I'm lazy about even using, markers and stuff, which, is a good way to do it too. Is like make markers for your chorus, your verse and your pre-chorus, and, so that you can, go back and it also, I think it helps when you're producing something to think about, like, where's the song going? Okay, this is a verse. Like maybe tone it back, maybe do things a little different on the verse. And having your guitars broken out like that gives you some freedom to do that. It may be easier to make edits, and say, okay, my verse guitars are all going to be panned slightly narrower, and then I go to the chorus and they're all, panned hard left and right. So it's an interesting thing to think about, And
because, like, for example, you and I, we do so much guitar tracking, we know how to record to studio. So we know exactly how we need to stop the guitar riff and then how to start it the next one so it sounds fluent, like it was one take.
Mm-hmm.
as
Exactly.
well. So
Since we've got that skill, it's pretty easy to implement in.
Yeah, definitely. All the edits were good. I'm glad I didn't find myself like having to go in and do any fades. Yeah. I think the only edit I did on both of them with the vocals wasn't really so much an edit, but I actually, removed some of the backing vocals I think in sort of like the last chorus buildup. I think you've got double chorus at the end, and so I cut out some of the backing vocals for the first repeat of the chorus just to stagger them in a little bit. Maybe the only time I actually ended up cutting up the tracks a little bit, just because I thought it made the second chorus a little bigger then. Because you can't get any bigger if it's already big and you've got like 4 vocals. And but I like your vocal arrangement a lot too. And
Thank you very much.
all the harmony layers you put in there, it's like, it's nice. Because if I only had like a lead vocal to work from, or like a lead and one harmony, then it's like, well, how do I make one harmony track, turn that into stereo, make it bigger, and beyond just having a good voice and laying out a good lead performance, either as a producer working with the talent or doing both like you're doing, choosing where to add extra harmonies and what kind of things you want to do with the harmonies and all that is it just makes it so much easier to mix when like you want a big chorus, and hey, you already have all these vocal parts, you already have a big chorus, you don't need to fake it and do different studio tricks and throw a bunch of plugins on stuff. It's so much easier when you just already have a bunch of vocal tracks and you can just like, okay, I'll bust them all together. Like even the vocal production on this, like it was super easy, and I had some fun with it, but I didn't sweat over it. I wasn't worried about anything. Like the mics sounded good, the performance was good. I didn't have to worry about tuning or timing, a bunch of editing and stuff. It was just a matter of let's throw a few plugins on it, make it sound cool, and there you go. I don't even think I did basically any automating on the volumes, which I usually do quite a lot of on vocals, just because it's an easy way to get stuff. If the singing isn't dynamic as you'd like it, it's easy to automate the volume. But I thought your singing was dynamic enough without all that, so it was easy to produce. Yeah. Which is good. So vocals can be one of the tricky things besides drums. Probably the second hardest thing to get is vocals, because you can work with less than stellar bass and guitar tones, but bad vocals or bad drums or really poorly recorded drums or vocals are like they can be a real nightmare to deal with. If that's the only take you can get and you're trying to do a project for someone, then you have to work with what you can get, and you spend more time correcting than actually improving.
So the vocals that I did invest a lot of time in trying to arrange it and do the best that I could to try create a larger sound. I kind of try to treat it as an instrument as best as possible. So that's why I did like the softer lower ones and all the other different harmonies and things going on, because I always love large sounding vocals, but I prefer to have it there just like doing guitars. If I want to thicken up guitars, I'll record another guitar track. So I kind of took that same approach with vocals. I want a larger vocal track, so I'll double up on the vocals and I'll add more to it to kind of create that dynamic and bottom. Challenging putting it all together. There's a lot of takes, but I really like the results, because in the past I've kind of got a little bit lazy with my own vocals, and I've always hated them because they just sounded too dry and too empty. And it took me a while to figure out on how to put the producer hat on for my own music. And kind of look at it from that angle and go, yep, this is what we need for the vocals for here.
Vocals are a very personal thing, and it's definitely, for me, like on an emotional level, it's the most difficult. It's the most stressful, because I'm putting this out there, and less nervous about like a slightly sloppy drum part or a little slop in the guitar than I am about my vocals being, really pitchy, or, the only exception to that is if I'm doing something that is like purposefully lighthearted and a little goofy, and then I'm like, okay, whatever. Then it's for fun, you know. Oh, you think my vocals sounded bad? Well, it was a joke. But when I'm trying to do something serious and like, you know, put it all on the line, yeah, it's really tough. And then to think of that through the sort of producer mindset too. How much do you want to beat yourself up over doing all these different takes and getting all these backing vocals right? And it can be a lot of work. I think your vocals came out great. I think you've got a great voice, and I think the production of it was good, and I thought your performance was great. I don't know if every note is 100% in tune, but I don't care. I don't know if you did
Probably not. It's probably not.
Yeah. And if you didn't do any pitch correction before you sent it over, then...
Zero. There's zero.
Hey, that's good then. Because I thought, to me, it sounds great. And I didn't hear anything that stuck out as a wrong note. You know, I think for rock and metal singing, it doesn't have to always be 100% in tune, but if you hear it and it sounds out of tune and you're like, I don't love how that sounds. Sometimes the performance might be okay and it's just the pitch. Other times you fix the pitch and you realize it's the performance. But yeah, no, I thought your vocals were great. So yeah, I liked it, and I like the cool little sort of echo thing. And I'm not sure how much of that you might have done via edits and how much that was just like a take. You have this sort of trailing or repeating line kind of near the end of the song. Was that done live, or did you comp something together? Or
They were all separate takes. So I wanted to do like an echo bouncing type of effect.
Mm-hmm.
So it was actually pretty challenging because I couldn't do it to clicks. I had to kind of time it in naturally on when to drop them in. So it took a fair few takes just getting the timing right, and then a lot of backwards and forwards to see what feels most natural and how they fit in the best.
Yeah, I mean, that's like an area where I could have added a delay on that section or something, but I don't have to because you've already got it done in the vocals, and there's no confusion as to, like, you don't have to go to the producer and say, hey, you know, make sure you throw this kind of delay at these lines and this reverb throw and something. It's just like, it's there. And it's nice to have stuff like that baked into the takes.
So with the recording, how I did the vocals is exactly how we described it. I did it in little sections, did each part, and to make sure I remembered the right notes and the right melody, I did like the lead, then all the backing to it to try sync them all in and flow.
Yeah.
Except for on the album, we did a cover of Cranberries' Zombie, which is heaps of fun. But when I did the vocals for that, I could not find my flow. I could not get it. So I ended up just doing, I think it was 7. I did 7 tracks just from start to finish. Push record, sang it all the way through. Just did that 7 times, and then went and picked the best ones out of all those.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if it was the weather was a certain way, or I woke up on the wrong side of the bed. I don't know what it was, but from a performing perspective, I just couldn't approach that as I did every other track on the album. I don't know why.
That's how I usually record drums now, because I don't have someone else sitting at the desk to like punch in certain parts and like, oh, I messed up this one part, we need to go back to that. It's just like play through the whole thing until I feel like I know I've at least nailed every part in the song, and I can comp it together, and I can put together a finished take. And if I do that enough times, then hopefully I have at least a really well-performed take of every part, so that I don't have to go back and edit everything. Whereas if I only get one, you know, mediocre take and then have to go in and try to slip edit all the drums, and that takes too long, and it's less fun than just playing the drums more. So... But yeah, that's a good way to do it. I never do that with vocals because I'm right here at the computer, so it's easy to be like, no, I messed up one note, taking that bit again. I'll take it line for line if I have to. But
yeah,
but yeah, if you can go through the whole thing, and it might make the performance more natural, because I always worry that like if I am doing it line by line, I'm thinking about like how to make that section the best. But I'm not always thinking about how everything fits together like
And how the flow of the actual song goes.
exactly, yeah, the big picture stuff, because I'm so like micro focused, and if every part of every song is like, you know, really lasered in like that, sometimes you can lose what the audience sees, which is much more of the big picture. And probably the audience is usually less worried about, you know, if that one verse was the most pitch perfect, you know, compared to, is it, you know, is it serving the song? Is it, you know, hitting emotionally? And you can always get away with like everything. I mean, if you're like artistically singing kind of out of tune, or, you know, playing kind of wild on the guitar, it's like, yeah, it's not always the most sterile and perfect take that is the best. Often it's not, and a lot of the famous songs we love have some, you know, some mistakes, or some just, you know, they're just going a little wild, and
Yep.
it's fun to capture all that in the studio. When my band records, that's what we've usually done, is just take the whole song, or at least like half the song, everything all together, live off the floor. Not vocals, that would be a little difficult, but but at least get all the guitars and the drums like in the room together, and not even worrying about, you know, set a click for the first 4 beats so you know what tempo it roughly should be, and then go off the grid and you know, hope for the best. And that usually works. You know, sometimes we've recorded the same song at wildly different tempos, because we just you know, one moment we're all energized and we're like really fast, and then we've taken it a few times and we're tired and we play it way slower, and you have to figure out which one is better.
Whenever we jam that song out live, or whenever we rehearse it, we always have to make note, by the time we hit that last chorus, keep yourself in check with speed. Adrenaline's pumping. It's a fun song to play. It's so much fun to play, but it's so easy to push it 6, 7 beats per minute more, or if not more, maybe 10 beats faster. And it's like, suddenly I'm doing speed metal, and it shouldn't be. It's like, no.
Yeah, unless you want to do it intentionally.
Yep.
Yeah, you have to keep on top of the tempo. It's
Absolutely, because we push that song nearly every time. So we just had a rehearsal last week, and we even mentioned it then. We're like, keep ourselves in check. Make sure that we're not going too fast.
yeah, and it's like, it's easy, especially with a sort of like kind of mid-tempo song like that to push it faster at the end. And if it's a really fast song, it's like you're going to tend to slow it down. You know, you're always sort of working towards the ideal point, I guess. But it's like, if you start a really aggressive song, you're doing fast blast beats and stuff, like, the drummer's most likely going to get tired and slow it down by 5-10% even. A lot.
Heaps and heaps of fun doing this. But now it's free for everyone to try. It's, I think we call it free domain or whatever, or royalty free. So you can grab all the raw files and do a mix yourself. The only thing we ask is just link us in so we can check it out and see what it's all about too, to see where your creative engineer and producer vision takes you, and see how completely either different or in line with either myself or Nick. Because I'm definitely keen to see where other people can take this this track.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's great to have good files to work from and a good song to play around with. So yeah, thanks for putting that out there. And check out Lee's channel at The Metal Prognosis. Thanks for hanging out, and hope you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for more stuff in the future.